We'll make a start and Greg can introduce everybody for this workshop. So off you go, Greg.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. Good everyone. Nice to see you today. So this is our workshop to bring you into the conversations that we're having at the moment around the regional catchment framework. This was a workshop that was going to happen a couple of months ago, but we did have a bit of illness go through the team, so we've had to delay things, but we're here now. And so I think, does everyone know our staff that are here today? So Grant, Kerry, Tane, and Paula. And we've got Patrick as well listening in, because obviously one theme that you'll probably pick up today is that there is a lot happening in the catchment space and a lot of interplay between the different functions that we do. Last time we had a good look at this program was a few years ago, and a lot has changed since then, and particularly with the advent of community groups that are a lot more active now, a lot more proactive, and a lot more, I guess, interaction in our catchment communities that we need to look at how we move forward with. So this is a good opportunity to take a look at these, what are quite substantial programs for council, and look at working towards the next long-term plan in terms of how we manage those programs, how we prioritise what we do, and ultimately how we continue to deliver good outcomes. It's certainly a program that gets a lot of really positive feedback from the community. Actually, one benefit from today is that because we are a couple of months later than anticipated, we'll be able to give you some feedback from a community survey that was undertaken, which provided some really helpful feedback. Without further ado, I'll pass on to Kerry to get things off. Yes.
Morena koutou. So yeah, thanks, Greg, and apologies. I was the reason for the first cancellation. I got COVID the morning of the first workshop, and I thought your preference would be to have not had me in the room for that. So today we're going to talk about a project that we initiated this year, the Regional Catchment Management Framework. Paul is running the slides there. And so the outcome that we're looking for from this workshop is that councillors have formulated a list of the key questions or issues that they would like considered during the development of this workshop to help inform us as we go on to bringing it all together. Now, as we go, we'll start off with a couple of presentations, and then Paula is going to be doing some facilitated sessions. She has put bits of paper and pens I think near all of you. And so if you get ideas as you go, please feel free to write them down, and then you'll be able to contribute those in the interactive sessions that we have. Yep, next. So just in terms of the overall agenda, I'm going to start off by giving some background and the purpose of the Catchment Management Framework. I'm going to hand over to Tane Desmond, who is going to talk about our current programs and how they run, just a reminder of the full suite of things that we undertake. Then we'll have an opportunity for some questions. I'll hand over to Paula, and then Paula's going to run the sessions where we get feedback from you on the list of issues you'd like considered. Then we'll give you some feedback from the landowner survey that we undertook, and then an opportunity for you to consider whether there's other things you would like to see us incorporate into the framework in light of that feedback. So just in terms of the discussion that we're having today, we'll talk a lot about river and catchment management. And so within the scope of the framework that we're developing, this will refer to the non-regulatory land and waterway management programs that we undertake that are supported by ICM outside of the flood protection and land drainage schemes. So the rivers outside of those schemes. Now, naturally, they all are one system, and we can't think of them in isolation. We might be making connections to the schemes, but specifically the programs today that we're talking about are those ones that we fund and support outside of those schemes. And just a little bit further background, so the work that is undertaken in those areas is mandated through the current Waikato Regional Plan, where there's a number of non-regulatory methods that enable council to provide funding support, advice, incentives to river and catchment management works that protect soils and reduce the adverse effects of soil on waterways. So just put a couple of those up there. Just as a reminder of the context and the background to this review, so our funding policies were developed quite some time ago now in consultation with communities, a really significant consultation process. And they were around a whole of catchment approach to flood protection, soil conservation, river management, water quality and biodiversity. And so the one for the Waikato and Waipa catchments is Project Watershed. We've got the Waiho Piako funding policy, Peninsula Project, and then the West Coast funding policy. So they're now, our Project Watershed, 23 years old. The priorities for funding at the time and the development of Project Watershed and the others were determined with the best available information they had then. And we have revisited that periodically since, as we've got better technology to enable us to determine where the highest risk areas are and the highest benefits can be gained. A big part of those funding policies were the catchment committees, and those committees were advisory committees to council with community reps, as some of you might remember or have been on them, and they made recommendations on the budgets and the priorities for the zones that they sat within. But our basic funding policies as they are today are that we can provide a 35% council grant incentive for land management activities in priority areas. So that's soil conservation, riparian enhancement, and associated wetland areas where they fall in those priority areas. A 50% grant generally for river management type work, so river erosion controls, vegetation management. And then for works that are sort of predate the Waikato Regional Council, but that we took on the land improvement agreements for, there's a 35% contribution towards the maintenance of those historic works, and those are predominantly in the Upper Waikato, Taupo and Paeroa ranges. So in 2013, Council was preparing for Plan Change 1, and they commissioned an independent review of all our sustainable land management practices at that time. There was a view that when Plan Change 1 came in and Plan Change 2 that would follow that some of the work that we were supporting wouldn't be required to be supported by us anymore. Landowners would be undertaking it themselves. And so from an ICM perspective, that reviewed all our programs, but ICM perspective, that review recognised that significant gains had been made previously where there was work consolidated in particular priority areas, like the scheme areas where there was a focus in doing significant works in those high-risk areas. The review acknowledged the value of incentives and that mechanism enabled much greater uptake of works than what landowners would be able to afford and undertake without it. But it did recommend refining our priorities. They were a bit out of date at that point. They recommended closer outcome monitoring aligned to work programs, so we better understood the outcome of our work. And they recommended better integration of river and catchment management. At that time, they were in two separate teams. And so all of those recommendations, those key three recommendations, were incorporated, and we have since used better technology to refine priorities. We're monitoring in our priority catchments, and our teams are together in the same team now. Since that time, something that has really become more prominent is funding partnerships. And so with the inception of the Waikato River Authority and Council's ability to now apply for MPI Hill Country erosion funding, Crown Infrastructure Partnerships, a more recent one from central government, as well as the longer standing with CQE2 and Ngā Whenua Rāhui. All of those organisations we apply to for funding to contribute to the landowner's share. So that's contributing to the 65% to land management actions that they would need to cover, or the 50% that they would need to cover for river. And so with that, we've been able to fund generally up to 70% of the landowner costs in priority catchments for soil conservation works, and with the Crown Infrastructure Partnership, up to 100% of the river management works. So that's really enabled a good uptake of works that would otherwise be unaffordable for landowners. In terms of the priority catchments and reaches, so those are determined through a modelling approach as well as ground truthing that our staff, we check, and previously with catchment committees, does this look like it makes sense on the ground? Those priorities are identified in zone plans, and we have an LTP measure that 80% of the funding that we have must be focused in those identified catchments. So we report on that each year. And the example we've got there is Waipa's soil conservation priority catchments and priority river reaches. So why do we need a regional catchment management framework? Well, the funding policies are now greater than 20 years old. And as you'll be aware, the flood protection and land drainage component of that has been reviewed through a project that's been led by Finance. They'll be reviewing the same policy that the catchment and river management work sits under as well. And the scope of that will extend to actions that can be alternatives for flood protection, like more nature-based solutions that our team undertakes. Most of the zone plans are out of date. They haven't been updated for 10 or more years in some cases. Catchment committees have been disestablished, so we no longer have that, that direct connection that we did to our program development that we had with communities. Sorry. What was that? Oh, yes. Yeah, that's right. It's been 12 years since the last significant review of our approach, and a lot has changed in that time. There's a lot of emerging opportunities and challenges. The development of a framework was identified in the last LTP as something we needed to do to put forward well thought out, supported by science and stakeholders, projects or program revisions for consideration by council. And we've got the next LTP preparation coming up. So the plan is that this framework will have been prepared. We will have reviewed our programs and made recommendations in time for the next LTP discussion. And just a list, I know that you'll be aware of many of them, but the emerging opportunities and challenges, you know, in particular, freshwater regulatory requirements. We still, at our funders, don't want to fund things that are required by regulation. We've got farm planning. We need to understand how sensibly our non-regulatory approach can mesh in, weave in with what will be required out of farm plans, freshwater farm plans and farm environment plans. Iwi settlements and the following joint management agreements and strategic work plans and Hauraki catchment plans that will come out of that we need to align to. Our climate action roadmap was nowhere near the focus on climate action back when we last reviewed, or in fact when our funding policies were developed. The emergence of catchment groups and needing a better approach, a consistent approach across the region on how to work with catchment groups and support them in achieving freshwater outcomes and biodiversity outcomes. Our forward consenting needs, they seem a long time away at the time when you get the consents, but they soon catch up with you. We need a really good plan for how to make that affordable and aligned with the rest of the organisation. And then the maintenance of existing schemes. We've got some very old schemes now that are nearing end of life. We need to determine what the risk of that is and what is a sensible way of funding that going forward, affordable way, because those schemes still do hold their value.
Can we just go look at catchment groups and the definition thereof? Council 6 years ago had catchment groups. You know, we had the Waipa catchment and other catchments. We've also got a large number of communities out there calling themselves catchment groups. So that's really confusing when you talk to people what they are. So if we're talking about catchment groups, can we make sure we clarify what type of catchment group we're talking about, whether it's community backed and organised or council led or whatever, because it is quite confusing.
And that's exactly the kind of feedback that we're seeking in terms of that, you know, the partnership area is, and that's great feedback that you'd like us to look at the definition of catchment groups, and we might have different approaches with each of those potentially. So the purpose of the framework, once we've reviewed those programs, is to provide direction to ICM in the planning and delivery of impactful, collaborative catchment and river management programs. The audience is WRC staff and governors. So we're not identifying actions for anybody else, any of our stakeholders. This is a document looking at our programs. We're seeking feedback from externals, but we're not looking to direct or suggest anything for any other entity apart from ourselves. This is to better enable us to go out and have those connections with our stakeholders. We're aware there's a lot happening in this space, and a big part of this project is ensuring good, effective, efficient connections with everything else that's going on in council. And so the framework will be informed by a lot of that legislative work that has been done or is being done around policy reviews, coastal plan that you've just talked about, but also our existing biosecurity strategy, the developing biodiversity strategy, iwi settlements. We need to make sure that we're delivering on our climate action roadmap, Nature Plus, and take into account those concurrent pieces of work around the review of flood protection and land drainage funding, protecting biodiversity on shared Māori whenua land, and the development of the Whangamarino Action Plan is just some examples. Collective impact, there'll be a lot of learnings from that project that can be brought into this one as well. And so a big part of this work is connecting in and ensuring we are engaging in an efficient way in the development of this concurrent work, but also that the work is looking for efficiencies in the way that it's delivered across our communities. So there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end of Tane's session. I'm just going to hand over to Tane now just to talk about, give you a bit more of a on-the-ground flavour of our existing programs. So Tane has been working with us in the catchment management space for 20 years. He's our team lead of the Waikato Waipa West Coast catchment team. He's also has a background in dry stock farming and still manages his family small livestock block in the Otorohanga flood protection area. So hand over to Tane to talk about work on the ground.
Cool. Thanks, Kerry, and good morning, councillors. Our current river and catchment management program has three main work streams: catchment management or soil conservation. Now, this focuses on erosion control for water quality, but also to protect productive soils, which are vitally important to our ag sector. River management, this focuses on bank stability and channel capacity. And it's also worth noting that this is the key mechanism for council in providing flood relief or reducing the impact of flooding on landowners and communities outside of our flood control schemes. And then finally, maintenance, which is essentially maintaining the works and the assets that have been delivered through the two earlier programs. Our work also complements that of the biodiversity team. We often work in collaboration on sites where there's some high value biodiversity, just to ensure that we deliver on a broader range of outcomes. This work not only positively impacts the properties where it's undertaken, but obviously also receiving environments, including our shallow lakes, our river systems, wetlands such as the Whangamarino, harbour environments both on the east and west coast, and marine environments such as the Firth of Thames. The image on screen is a property in the King Country where we're working in partnership with a landowner to establish some poplar poles on some land use capability class 6 land with an erosion risk. Poplars have excellent root systems for binding hillsides together, and they also reduce groundwater, which is a key driver on earth flow erosion, like we can see on property. They also have a range of benefits for landowners. They're excellent fodder during times of drought, often used on the east coast for that purpose, and they coppice and regrow. They're deciduous, so they lose their leaves in winter, allow light to the pasture, and they can also be grazed underneath. So this doesn't require permanent stock exclusion. Last year we planted in the order of 8,000 to 10,000 poles across the region, and that's just on hill country. Poles in the past, in the 80s and 90s, were used on rivers as well. We no longer do that for obvious reasons. Another key mitigation is the retirement of land. This is some class 7 and 8 land in the Opatia catchment in the Lower Waikato. And we're working in partnership with the landowner here to retire that highlighted area. Typically we're using conventional fencing, but we're starting to use a bit more 5-wire fencing, depending on stock classes that are being farmed and the pressure on those sites. We have to work quite closely with landowners, obviously, around fence alignment to ensure mustering can happen efficiently and we don't cause stock traps. Last year, from memory, about 180 kilometres of fencing was completed and just under 1,000 hectares of land similar to that was retired. We obviously advocate planting. On smaller retirements, we look at mixed grade, larger grades of natives, but that can be cost prohibitive. And this is a site on the west coast in the Waimai Valley. This landowner's retired about 15 hectares, and we've supported the planting of small grade manuka and kanuka with 20% long-lived species. And that's to complement the existing native vegetation that's there and just sort of help that next step of regeneration, bring in birds and seed sources. Monitoring plots are established on these larger ones just to keep an eye on survival and ensure that we identify any issues or threats to that planting early. In the past, landowners have been keen at looking at exotics. We no longer fund production exotic planting. And we caution, I guess, the planting of radiata pine and others on that class of land. The soils are really too shallow and there's a lot of impacts during harvest time. But we are seeing radiata pine going into blocks around the region, primarily driven through the carbon returns that are on offer. In staff's travels, we often identify high value biodiversity sites, some quite unique ecosystems. The one on the right there is a sphagnum moss wetland, a karst or limestone landscape in the Waitomo. The one on the left is a coastal wetland on the Coromandel. And at these times we try and incorporate the protection of these into our programs and work with the biodiversity team to ensure that that ecological function is still there. Just before I move on to river management, make a quick note that Council has a policy at the moment that requires legal protection where our contribution exceeds $35,000. And that can either be through a council covenant registered on title, but we will work with Kiwi2 and Ngā Whenua Rahui as well. River management. This program entails a number of mitigations, blockage removal, vegetation management, removal of crack willow and poplar trees that are falling into channels, fencing, planting, and the construction of erosion control structures. This is a site at Honakiwi in the Waipa. As you can see, there's pretty extensive bank erosion occurring on those river flats, which is highly valuable land for that farmer. There's also a reasonably large slip there that is threatening an access track in the District Council road. This is the same site 3 years later. The inset photograph there is some rock structures we've built to protect the toe of the bank and deflect flows around the corner, but it's also been fenced and planted. The planting there is a mixture of typical riparian species, native ones, and we've also utilised some Matsurana willow poles. Now, we limit the use of Matsuranas. They do have a maintenance, burden associated with them. They establish root systems really fast and are very valuable for these types of situations, but we will look to thin those out and then just rely on the native riparian species and the structures to maintain that site. All projects that receive funding from Council have a landowner agreement. They set out the issue and describe the proposed solutions. They also capture all the costs, actions, cost share arrangements and funding conditions. We also utilise maps and photographs just to make sure that everyone's on the same page around what's being retired and fencing alignments. We also utilise technology. This is a drone flight. We were invited down to Marakopa to assist the landowner following a bit of a weather bomb event that occurred there a couple of years ago. Technology like drones are becoming really useful for us. They're a really efficient way of getting up and looking at the issues, capturing some up-to-date aerial photography to help inform the discussions around what we might do in these cases. In this situation, we discussed and are looking at a program around some permanent retirement, but also some pole planting to help address those issues. We are also keenly watching developments in high-resolution imagery and LiDAR, and we see some real advantages there in being able to proactively target these areas before the erosion occurs rather than trying to patch it up following the event. And just a final slide, once the project's completed, we'll revisit the site. We capture costs and output information, such as length of fence, area retired, numbers of plants, etc. That's all loaded into our asset management system for reporting to council and to our co-funders. We undertake a financial reconciliation, so we look at which parties contributed and what our funding share agreement was. That sometimes results in a refund to the landowner or possibly an invoice if we've delivered the project on their behalf, which does occur on occasion. And those projects then move across into our monitoring and maintenance regime and looked at on a cycle, just to ensure that we identify any sort of issues or risks or weed control or the like that might be required, and that can be dealt with in a timely manner.
Everyone. Has anybody got any questions? You can't hear me? That better? Yeah. Just, is there any questions of clarification before we move on?
River management through mid-July and end of July, the Waipa was pretty high and close to flooding in a number of places. And your comment in one of the earlier slides about river management and flood controls and the likes, the greatest benefit that I saw during that time, and I've had a lot of experience with the Waipa and its flooding. I've been farming there for 45 plus years, and the family's had it for 108 years. So the reality is the dams and the control of the dams have the greatest impact on flooding in the Waipa, and how the flows are managed out of the Waikato to allow the bubble to come through. So the reality is that that's the greatest control, high level. But are you really talking about the local level, managing the blockages and the diversions through the scouring and whatever, as opposed to the high level? Because the way that was managed in July was extremely well done compared to 1998 when it was a mess. So there's a lot of learning gone on to achieve the level of control that we had. So we're talking lower level, aren't we?
Yeah, so certainly acknowledge the impact of the hydro system and the ability for the dams to take the peak off, and the impact on the lower river. Certainly we've seen that many times. I think it might have been 2004 when we had two peaks converging, and that was not great. But yeah, I guess I am referring directly to that local level, the removal of blockages to ensure that we maintain channel capacity, the replacement of vegetation and crack willow that invariably falls over into the channel. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at there. Yeah.
Warren?
Thanks, Robbie. Tony, can I just get you to go back and expand on that? You mentioned a covenant and $35,000. Just is that per project or just?
Yeah, so that's it's per valuation number, just so we've got a consistent basis to apply it on. So yeah, it's a council policy that has been in place for since Project Watershed, and essentially it's there to protect the ratepayer and the landowner's investment and our co-funders' investment in that work. So essentially it just sets out that this is the work that was completed, this is the cost of it, and a set of conditions around maintaining that. It's largely stock exclusion and maintaining fences, but it also extends to maintaining the planting to ensure successful establishment.
Thanks for that.
Stu?
So just clarifying, this is about clarification rather than future stuff, if I'm correct. Yeah. Just with regards to the 2013 review and I guess the way in which biosecurity and biodiversity integrates into this, just want to refresh myself that there used to be two divisions when I first got involved with council, but they were amalgamated prior to that 2013 review, weren't they?
They were amalgamated in 2014, actually. So that was the fit for purpose review that Vaughan Payne did.
Right.
So 2014, it was joined together. Yeah. So the 2013 review was prior to that happening.
John Simmons and Scott, wasn't it? Okay. Yep.
Bruce?
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm just still at the stage of understanding the scope of what you're trying to achieve. And earlier on, you said we're talking about our own program, not external operations. But where does the step come in where you understand the catchment management ecosystem of the whole region and where you fit in it? what you're doing, what others are doing, and how we might actually operate together. So I'm just concerned when you made that statement that we're narrowing ourselves down rather too quickly.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think it's about recognizing we need to be able to contribute in that wider space, and like the Collective Impact Project is a really good example of that. But understanding what our priorities are and what we can bring to that, and how we can assist with the monitoring, for example, that we undertake, how we can incorporate other people's outcomes and measuring that. So it's not about working in exclusion, but it's about understanding the best way that we can contribute to that bigger picture in an implementation and a monitoring perspective.
So understanding the best way we can contribute needs you to know a lot more, I think, about the total catchment ecosystem and all of the players in it and where they're operating. And where is the place where you can best add value? Because, you know, you've got a finite budget like everybody else. And so my sense of what I've been listening to so far is that it's sort of what I would call old style catchment management. Not trying to be too negative too early in the process, but it sounds to me like there's still a deep heritage in the way we're operating, which goes way back to the days of catchment commissions. And it's still evident when you make presentations, and particularly when you run off the list of things that this is going to cover off. And, you know, I can't help but notice every time biodiversity is the last word in the list. Not only was it the last word in the list, it was spelt wrong. This is worrying. So I'm sort of getting, I guess, into a similar space that Stu was coming from. I just need for us to provide you with assistance in how you're framing this up. I don't think we should go too quickly into focusing entirely on what the council does.
No, and just through the chair, yeah, so we are getting input from others in this, so we'll be interviewing the other stakeholders that are doing a lot of work in this space. Catchment groups, we've already held a catchment group workshop, we've done surveys with landowners, we've got a survey out with iwi at the moment. So, and I guess exactly what you're saying about the nature of the program still looking like it did decades ago, and that's because we're still working under those funding policies. Our funding policies for catchment management are around soil conservation, water quality, river management, and so this is the opportunity, I think, to potentially reshape that if that's where council wants to go.
Just concerned, I know I had concerns when the initial stages of the WRA, they were sort of isolated projects, and I think my observations are WRA has got better at looking at the bigger picture, and Stu might agree or disagree, but I'm concerned.
I agree, don't worry.
My concern is that we're looking, you've got parameters for this that you outlined at the start. You know, one of the things we use integrated catchment management, and to me that's everything. And we've still got silos where we're trying to tick off this one, but then how do we know about that one that's in another silo? And how do we know the bigger picture of what we're doing? And I still don't think council has got it right and is even going to get it right. To actually see, you know, on a map, this is what's happening here, here, and here, and here, and this is regional council, this is WRA, this is catchment group, this is a large landowner that's doing it all on their own. How do we know that the cumulative effects of all that are really enhancing the catchments and the biodiversity and the biosecurity, all that stuff? Didn't forget the biosecurity. Yeah. And I could spell it.
You can almost answer that.
So that's my concern in setting out to do this particular piece of work outside of the other stuff that you mentioned. How do we really know the catchment as a whole is going to benefit? And you may say that's too hard. Well, I like doing the hard stuff, and I'd throw that out as a challenge right now. And I also throw out the challenge to throw out the funding policies because watershed and the likes. We need to, you know, do the hard stuff. That needs a complete and utter review. So unless it's meaningful I just say here goes another 3 years. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a bit cynical after all these years at times.
Kia ora.
I don't know. Can anyone comment on that, please?
Which piece?
So, Paula will talk shortly about the themes within this review. And one of those is monitoring and reporting. One of them is partnerships, integration. So we are looking at those things that you're mentioning, and the purpose of this will be, in fact, the next session to seek your feedback onto each of those themes. There are things happening in that space around, and definitely that whole of Catchment 1 has been a real challenge right back from when I was at the WRA as well. We started to start the River Restoration Forum to understand what everyone was contributing, how we could monitor the impacts. The way technology is moving is giving us more ability to do that. And there's a number, and I was speaking with Nikki about the collective impact data tool last week and the potential to extend that into catchment stuff in future once it's been well established as meeting the biodiversity need. But yeah, it is a challenge. It's a challenge to understand what council is contributing versus everyone else, versus climate change. We have monitoring set up to look at what council work is doing in priority catchments, and that's why we have, I think, traditionally taken that, tried to do a large amount of work in a priority catchment so that it's not a scattergun approach, similar to what the Waikato River Authority has been doing. We jointly produced that river restoration strategy to identify the areas to put a targeted approach in, and then monitor the change of that. But I think you're right, we could do better, and that's what we're trying to define through this project, is how we could better do that.
Produce a pathway to get there.
That's the plan. Yeah, recommendations.
Kia ora.
Well, kia ora koutou. I think I like collaboration because it's necessary, especially between all the different fractions you have out there, landowners, trust fund, blah, blah, blah. I like the fact that you've got a framework that's looking at a wider picture, because back in the day when I first started, our catchment committees that we had, that I was involved in, were bloody marvellous. And the one I was on with Grant, that wasn't run by us. It was run actually by the people themselves, and Grant was the one running around for them half the time, but the committees weren't run by WRC. And we did a great job. There's just a few things, niggly things, I'm not sure whether they even come into play right now. And as one as the poplar trees, for instance, I know for a fact, I think it was in Taumarinui, one of the incorporated farms up there, they grew so high and then they topped them. Is that part and parcel of the framework? Or is that just, because I've seen them being bowled over by bad winds and stuff. That's one. The other one is for instance, at the Pūniu River, when you go over the bridge on the Te Amotu side, there's a real awesome flood plan that's been put there, and it was planted by Pūniu River Care. But when there's no floods, there's animals down there. So and it happens in Thames too. So I don't understand that scenario of we put things in place and then when it's not needed, we don't use it. Because I would have thought the impact through the plan change one that we were on for many years, one of the things we tried not to do was to let animals in those floodplains at any time because of the 80-year or whatever. So I'm wondering whether your framework looks at those silly little things, or is it just a big picture thing?
Cool, great questions. Poplar planting, yeah. One thing I didn't mention is that the varieties that we're planting now, there's been a lot of research and development gone into producing crosses that are much smaller, less brittle, and more resistant to disease and pests. Certainly the poplars of yesteryear are huge liabilities, and they don't last forever. Poplars do have the ability to be coppiced and regrow, and certainly that is part of a good maintenance regime, is to go through and top them before they become too heavy, and let them go again if you still need them at that point there. Yep. I'm familiar with the site on the Pūniu. We worked with PRC in the early days on that. Yeah, our policy is that stock should be excluded from those areas. So yeah, and when we find stock there, we certainly approach the landowner and remind them of their duties there.
Oh,
So,
that's great.
Yeah.
And the other one I had, the last one is around Wilding Pines. You know, do we entice our landowners to get rid of them, or do we wait till they get so high that you can't move them? You know, that because in Tauhara North, remember, we did a big exercise of removing it all, and I think WRC, WRA, we were all involved in that. And they haven't sort of regrown, but they are still there anyway, in the rest of the country, I mean, in the rest of Waikato.
I was going to say, yeah, there's definitely investment going into wildling pine control. It is a real problem. I know Patrick's team are running a program. We are often involved in helping restore cutover areas from that were previously in pine, and it's a real issue, and something that we definitely take a keen eye on when we're looking at our maintenance inspections, and yeah.
And then once again, that, you know, the value of this session is to get your feedback onto the things you would like us to consider as part of this framework. So, you know, we're seeking feedback from a number of other avenues as well, but it's really important that we know what council would like to see us incorporate into this.
Jean, got a question?
Yeah, thanks for that. And hi everyone. My question is, because I really liked, especially what Bruce and Noel started with, like, what is our audience that we are appealing to with our current work? Because I'm trying to have a think about for the next session, you know, what is the audience for the future work? I'm just mindful that, you know, this is non-legislative and we need to appeal to the public to want to pay for it. And so the issue of scale comes up. So, I mean, I live on a lifestyle block, then you've got, you know, the more farm scale, and then you've got the landscape scale we've been talking about more in that collective impact and natural heritage program as a shift we're going towards. So what's the current scale of audience and people that you're working with? I'm guessing it's more the middle, like the farm scale.
Yeah, so traditionally we work with individual landowners, but we do take a catchment approach. So we'll do you know, catchment based promotion in our priority catchments, workshops in those areas to try and bring communities together and onto the same page and get their aspirations. With a greater move to sort of farming based catchment groups, we see the opportunity, and our funding policies don't really currently allow for supporting that kind of approach. So that's something that we'd like some feedback from council on. Is there an appetite for that? Because it's an individual landowner agreement at the moment. But we also do, some zones have a small community fund where we will fund groups doing work on either in collaboration with marae or schools or on land that is owned by LINZ, that kind of thing, where we can support a group, but that is limited at the moment. Our funding policy is definitely set up for funding individual landowners.
It's just interesting that, say, the Natural Heritage Program is very much in our face as councillors, and a lot of this work is very much at your level, and there might be one or two councillors who understand it well, but the rest probably won't. With these funding policies and such. And so just wondering, yeah, what direction we might take that and how to appeal to the public to want to pay for it. Yeah, like whether it is the lifestyle block owner or whether it is whether we want or how we can contribute to landscape scale as well. In one project, I mean, yeah, and how we would fund that. Yeah.
Yeah, just interested in your thoughts around the bottom end of the catchment, and are you looking at things that you know, where they hit our estuaries and that sort of thing? You know, we're seeing smaller streams and stuff clogging up with mangroves and a lot of issues around that, silting up, rising water levels and all that sort of thing. Is that part of your focus and framework at this stage?
Yes, it will be a full mountains to sea approach to how we want to manage catchment. So that's why the collaboration with the flood infrastructure teams and the regional resilience teams is so important. It's the big focus is really on catchment resilience, and nature-based solutions coming more into that, which fit definitely in that lower catchment as well as the upper catchment revegetation stuff.
Bruce?
Yeah, I just, to remove all doubt, you asked some direct feedback on catchment groups. Yes, yes, yes. And the bottom line, I have to say as a councillor, I get more phone calls from catchment groups than I get from individual landowners. Now there's an obvious reason for that. The thing is, these guys are hungry for support and they're extremely focused on building processes which empower a whole community within a catchment. And I think our job as a regional council is to get alongside them as soon as possible, really early in the early stages of the development of their catchment group. Some of them have got going, I would suggest, where we have not been in there in the front row, and they've gained money from MPI and all over the place and started building the process themselves. And they have missed out on the opportunity of the long history of regional council and its technical expertise. And they've even gone off and hired technical experts who, in my mind, actually missed the boat in a number of cases, quite seriously missed the boat, because they haven't come to the technical expertise within the regional council. So I just wanted to remove all doubt of where I'm standing in terms of this framework. Please focus on the opportunity being presented by the development of catchment groups in recent times in particular.
Noted.
Stu?
And just to add to that, we need to be really clear about how much money we've got to play with. And I just see in today's media monitors that Mangatautari projects come up there saying, hey, this blimmin' government funding's dried up. And in the last 5, possibly longer year period, we've seen these huge boosts of funding from the government, and then they disappear again, and these projects are in the crap, and then they inevitably want to come to us. And the balance of how much funding we have through our processes to date in terms of allocating outside of catchment groups, if we're going to start funding catchment groups, we've either got to do some big rate increases or we've got to take funding away from our existing programs. So just need to be really clear about how we're going to do all this, because the only thing worse than funding projects is funding projects that don't have sustainable funding going forward, because it really pisses people off here.
No.
No, but Stu brings a really important point, is that, I see Mangatautari as a regionally and nationally significant. No, yeah, but those, this is under biosecurity, and we need to be thinking with our community, what is important to us? They're talking about the what was Lake Horseshoe in Hamilton being fenced. And, those are the sort of priorities that we need to have a conversation with our communities. What do they support? And are they prepared to put their hand in their pocket? If they're not, well, we've got a clear steer. But going forward, how much are we prepared to spend on the work that's been talked about today? So Stu raises a good point about the balance of where we go.
I'd just like to put my 5 cents worth in is when we got to the end of that. It's all about alignment for me. I've brought the discussion to Pamela a couple of times about groups that have got funding from government and central government and others, yet we don't seem to, well, as a councillor in my own area, I'm the last one to find out about it. So I've got, and like Dairy NZ was given a couple of $1 million over the last couple of years for doing, but are those specific things the most important to our catchment, or are they a feel-good project to some landowner? And that's the bit I think we need to be working together to get the best bang for that buck. And I see that as the priority, especially over my side, or like on the eastern side, that everybody's in the room when we're starting to make these decisions, and not just one little group that's got 100 grand from someone. And so I think it's all about the big picture of getting that when we do something, we're actually going to get the biodiversity outcomes, the water quality outcomes, and the land management outcomes that we all want to see and that we want to pay into to get those outcomes for all of the community. So, yeah, that's my 5 cents worth anyway.
No, well, I think if you're okay now, Mr. Chair, we'll hand over to Paula because some of these ideas that are coming through are exactly the stuff we're wanting to get on paper. So I'll hand over now to Paula Reeves, who's going to facilitate this next session.
Kia ora, thanks, Kerry. So just going back to the workshop outcome, so it's to formulate a list of the key questions or issues that you would like considered during the development of the regional catchment management framework. And really very much in your words. So that's kind of how we're structuring it today. So we're going to look at some key focus areas, and these are ones that have come out as Kerry and her team have been talking to people and gathering information for the framework. So the first one there is actions and places. So a lot like what Tane was talking about, the work that we do, that we support, where we do it, and it might also include it might be new mitigations and technologies. We know there are some new farming practices coming in using AI or new tech that maybe could be considered in the work that we do. The second one, there's integration. So that's across our council programs, and Kerry gave you a whole list of them during the presentation. Partnerships, who we work with, and currently we work with a lot of different people. Funding, which we've been hearing lots about, and then monitoring and reporting. So how we demonstrate change, and so we have the Catchment Environmental Monitoring Program that's run by SPY, and then how do we tell people about it? Okay. Too many buttons. So how I thought we could do this is, so for each of these topics, if you have a think about what you sort of recall about partnerships from the presentations today or from your knowledge of the current program, and then what is an issue or question about partnerships that you think should be considered in the development of the framework? So that's the task. And I thought maybe what would be good to do is if you can just think about what you think some of those issues or questions would be, and maybe do it in pairs, so just have a discussion about them. And then if you can write down in your own words, just if you've got an idea or a question on a piece of on a post-it, which I'll give out to you. Is that all right? And so Robbie, you'll have to find someone. Yep, you can team up as a 3, and Councillor Nicol, you could maybe message me in the chat and I can capture your thoughts. So that's the question there. Is there any questions about it? We're starting with partnerships and then we're going to go into the other 4 topics.
Thank you.
I'll give you 10 minutes. I'll see how you're going after 10 minutes. You'll get quicker at it, I think. a few more minutes?
Oh, we just went right. We just were mainly costs that we can all afford. And
Online, yeah.
Okay.
Talk about today as well.
So everybody's popped all of their questions and issues up. So what I'll do is I'll just go through and see what we've got, and really just asking if there's any kind of clarification from what we've got here.
Sure.
All right.
You not the hand watch.
Oh, I can just hold it. So the first one is, how do we bring spatial planning in at the outset? Need district councils to be involved? Project scale and timeframe, will it make a difference? Affordability of partners and landowners? Long-term management, continuation of catchment groups and council? How do we get better alignment of funding sources? How do we agree on outcomes? Wider community input and support of outcomes? How to build long-term partnerships that cover initial work and maintenance, sustainable funding for catchment groups, but don't forget those who don't have access to groups, and better cooperation with central government funding initially. They tend to work on short-term role catching initiatives. Boat catching. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about any of those that have been put up? So they look like there was some themes coming through there. And then Councillor Nicol had how to build long-term partnerships that cover both initial work and maintenance going forward, or an obvious transfer between entities at that juncture. How to ensure every community adaptation plan has a vision for soil and river management that the community signs up in order to help fund their vision, like the Wharikawa Coast 2020. How to involve district council so we can provide a united front to the community for regional catchment management. How to appeal to everyone that contributes towards rates that pay for the project, and is contestable the right way to go or a different approach to distributing funds. Could a targeted rate for an area be used to fund near 100% of the work? Yeah, maybe some of those ones go into the funding? Yeah, okay. All right. So what we're going to do next is just hand out the other focus areas and just get you to sort of repeat the task again for each of those. And so we'll just rotate them around the room as you finish. Now that you've got the hang of it. In funding. Is that funding?
Oh, so I'll take that. Doing.
So when you get a new sheet, the great thing is some people have already done some thinking already, so you just need to add anything new to it. Thanks everyone for all of those contributions. I'm not going to go through all of them right now. I might try and theme them a little bit because we've got so many, we think what we might do is get you to vote on which ones you think are the most important. But before we do that, Kerry's going to take you through the results from our landowner survey and see if there's anything that's come out of that that you think hasn't been captured yet.
Yeah, so we didn't want to do this first in case it biased your thoughts, but this might prompt some further thoughts. So as part of the collecting information for the background of developing the framework, we developed a survey with our social science team, and that was sent to all landowners that have had environmental protection agreements, so the kind of things that Tana was talking about in the past 5 years across the region. That was about 800. And then landowners in priority catchments who have never worked with us. So those are our priority catchments where we need to do 80% of our work. So have never worked with us. That was about 700. We also had a tablet at the field days that landowners could fill in if they were from the Waikato region and had a land block. We invited them to fill that in. And altogether, we kept the survey open for about 4 weeks. We had 196 respondents, which was actually really good. And Comms tells us that was a much better response than we often get. So we're just going to run through some of the, there was a number of questions about the performance of our staff, and those were all very positive. But we thought in terms of the programs, we'd run through some of those results. So when we asked the question, have you previously worked with Waikato Regional Council to undertake river and catchment work on your property? 78% of people had, and 21% of people said they hadn't. So it's not surprising we had lots that has, because we targeted those catchments. If they hadn't worked with us, worked with our river and catchment teams, what had stopped them from doing that? Interestingly, 43% said they didn't know about the programs. 34% said they were worried about putting a covenant or legal protection on their property. And approximately a third said they were waiting to see what was required through regulation before they wanted to do any works. There was quite a large category of other, which were things like my property doesn't need any work done on it. I've only just bought the property, that kind of thing. Again, 17% didn't want to sign an environmental program agreement with council. So there was that reluctance to sign up to any sort of legal agreement that was off-putting. And then there was a number of other things about not wanting to do the work with WRC, didn't know who to talk to about the programs, or not eligible for funding, not planning to do any work. But those three big ones, didn't know about it, tells us something about our promotions, didn't want to put a covenant on, or waiting to see what was required through regulation. For those that did work with us, we asked them what they were looking to achieve when they made contact with council. Now, these questions were not mutually exclusive. They could answer more than one, so they don't add up to 100. But yeah, more than 80% were looking at undertaking some sort of planting or fencing project. Over 40% looking to address an erosion issue. Just over 30% were looking at protecting biodiversity. 30% poplar and willow poles, and then there's a smattering of other things around protecting sensitive downstream receiving environments like lakes and wetlands, addressing flooding, obstruction removal, or maintenance of existing works. 3% were looking at wanting to protect a culturally significant site. And then for those that then went on and did the work prior to that first contact, what were the key factors that influenced the decision to proceed with working with council? 80% of people wanting to do something good for the environment. So that was interesting. Almost 70% said it was because of the funding that they had access to. Around a third because they thought it would help with fulfilling future farm plan requirements. And about a quarter because the work was too difficult to undertake themselves. And that is often the case with river management actions. They, that work is technically complex. And then other things around protecting downstream sensitive environments that had previous positive experiences working with our staff. They liked what their neighbours were doing with WRC, and then concern about meeting regulation requirements for a small number. And then in undertaking delivering those projects, what were the most significant challenges for them in actually project delivery? So doing this kind of work that we know is important for the environment. A different scale here noting, but over 40% said the challenging financial climate was a big impediment. The impact of climate weather events was also very challenging, and we know that ourselves. Scheduling works in a busy farm environment was challenging. About 20% said there were no significant challenges, and then others were talking essentially about contractor services, sourcing plants, securing contractors for planting and fencing, getting advice. In terms of rating the experience with working with our river and catchment programs, we asked a number of questions, but the key ones I think here for today were, they were asked a question and they were asked whether they strongly agreed, which is the red on the left-hand side, disagreed, whether they disagreed, neither disagreed or agreed, and then strongly agreed and don't know. So when they were asked to consider would they have been able to complete the work without WRC's advice, about a third of people said they disagreed. So they're saying they wouldn't have been able to do the work without WRC's advice. When asked about being able to do the work without WRC's funding, that increased to 2/3. So 63% is it, said they wouldn't have been able to do the work without the funding that they got from WRC. And then we asked if there were any environmental related issues in the area or catchment that they thought should have more focus from Council's catchment management team. And interestingly, animal pest management and plant pest management came up as very high, and there were a number of comments around the impacts of plant pests in planting areas, and then of browsing animal pests damaging plantings. More focus on river and stream bank restoration was the second highest, but then we had impacts of severe weather events, biodiversity restoration, supporting catchment groups. 20% of people thought we should have more focus on that, and around just under 10% thought more focus on environmental monitoring. People gave a lot of general comments, and at the end they were asked if they wanted to add anything else, and it was really interesting. There were a lot of people added extra comments, and they were overwhelmingly positive. So we just thought we'd put a few of them in here for you. A real win for the environment, a real win for the farming community. We would not be able to do this to the level we are without WRC. It would not be sustainable for us financially. We do not feel so alone in this task. Have nothing but praise for all the staff we've dealt with over the years, an exceptionally positive experience. So lots of really positive feedback on the programs. And then when we asked people who had worked with us, would they work with us again in the future? 100% said yes. Not a single person said they wouldn't, which was kind of surprising because people like to be a little negative in surveys, and it was anonymous. So 196. Yeah, so that was nice feedback for the staff as well. But so obviously there are lots of comments. We're still working through theming, but that gives you a bit of an overall flavour of what landowners were saying to us about their feedback on our river and catchment programs. So I'll hand you back to Paula at this point.
Just before we were going to look at if there's anything that's come out of that that we should add to our key focus areas. But before we do that, I just thought I'd pose this question. So now that you've heard the results of the survey, was there anything that surprised you?
I've got a question more about what you've just covered off in the results. So this survey was entirely in rural areas, was it?
Yeah, so it went to people who have either done work with us or if they had areas over 20 hectares. Yep, so it was to people who are currently eligible for our funding.
Yeah, because we do have a city constituency. And the point that I wanted to make was that I'm sure others might agree with me. I say this, I've been rather disappointed in the way our city has operated with the Hamilton City Council, because catchment issues are city and urban issues as well. And it appears that we've not really maximised some of the opportunity there from I would say, a very supportive, large number of very supportive people who want to see the urban catchment managed in a better way. So I'm just making the point that the survey is really about rural landowners. And we need to be thinking about urban catchments as well.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It was definitely people eligible for our catchment and river programs. That was the focus. But it's a great point, Bruce.
I was going to ask, so that was over all of the Waikato region, no matter where you were?
Yeah.
When you
so-
broke it down to areas, did any of the statistics change?
Coromandel had a higher concern about the impact of weather events. That came through as a significant change. There were some nuances. We had good response actually across all zones, slightly higher in Waipa, slightly lower in Taupo, but in between it was fairly consistent. Some areas were had a little bit more concern about the impacts of regulation. That was a little bit more of a impediment.
But PC1 thing?
Was
Was
yeah.
that a PC1 thing? Yeah.
Yeah, it could likely be. Yep. Waiting to see what was coming out of PC1. But across the board, concerns about animal pests, plant pests were pretty consistent, and consistently that the impact of our funding was a major consideration that was also consistent across zones. Yeah.
So just on that last comment, because I picked up on that the wouldn't have done it without the funding. With our discount plant procurement scheme, have we kept any statistics or information, or do we ever have any on how that's been applied and what the results have been? And I guess where I'm going, one of the points I often make to my colleagues at the River Authority is the River Authority's funding and this funding is a very small part of what needs to happen over the next 80 years. And it always will be, because we know, I don't know how many landowners, targeted ratepayers we need to fund one project on one farm. Roughly, I tell people it's 100, but I could be wildly off. But my point is, in acknowledging I'm probably a bit different and unique, there's a lot that a lot of farmers could do and that I think they need to do, albeit on a smaller scale than what we do sometimes, acknowledging that by necessity, the approach that we take has to be relatively high quality and in terms for a whole bunch of reasons, as we all know. But just wonder, to me, there's an opportunity for us to start promoting the opportunity for individual landowners to do stuff off their own back, because if we just wait for this organisation, River Authority and one or two others to fund it, we're just simply not going to get there in 80 years' time, And there's 100, as Bruce Wall knows, there's 101 different ways of approaching all these sort of projects. Well, that's my point. Have we collected some stats on it? And my point is a lot are doing it, but there's a whole lot that aren't doing it as well. And look, some won't, but I think there's an opportunity to try and get some to do it, because if I remember Vaughan Payne was initiating a bit of a project way back on trying to track some of this, and I don't know where that is, but I do think it's time that we try and refresh that, because and I don't want to commit because I don't have the right to do it, but I would like to think the River Authority would be interested in perhaps participating in that as well, and they probably have been in the past. Anyway, you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah, and certainly through the National Science Challenge, there was the project to add that component to the LAWA, so Land and Water Atmosphere Database, which was for where everyone could enter their work that they were doing, and the idea was that regional councils would do the same, and you get this big collective. Yep. But actually the funding finished and now there's sort of no support to continue doing it. LAWA don't have the resources to do it. I don't know how widely used it's going to be. I know the River Authority have tried to do that. Tane was involved in the trial, the bubble trial that we did, that Vaughan requested. But as I said earlier, Patrick might be, stop, but the work that they've been doing through the collective impact data tool, that might be a way, because you've got New Zealand Landcare Trust involved and you've got Go Eco, others that are actively working in that space with catchment groups and things, that maybe just even within the Waikato, that would have the potential to meet that need of understanding what people are doing more widely.
I mean, it's pretty frustrating to hear, and I get it, but nonetheless, it's frustrating to hear people say, oh, we're waiting to see what PC1 does. Well, PC1 is 10% of an 80-year journey. If you're stuffing around not wanting to plant a few trees because of that, then we've got some major communication to do, you know?
And and that's exactly one of the reasons why the feedback was so good, because it can help us target our promotions and our information that we're giving people about what will be covered in PC1 versus the broader picture. And then also, some of the feedback that you gave earlier about just advising people. Hopefully you've put that on one of the forms in terms of what we do and where we do it, is if you're wanting to see us up that advisory component to landowners more than just our incentivised program. I think we did become very focused on that incentivised program over the last few years because we had so much shovel-ready money. It was a lot of work to get that money out there, but it could be that we make a shift more into providing more advice for landowners alongside, priority
Can I just jump
incentivisation.
in? Yes, I fenced all my waterways, but I know there's about 30 or 40 posts that I'm going to have to move back from within the 3 metres. I thought I'd done the right, but that should be able to be picked up over time. Okay, it's a long time, but there must be a way in which we can, that once they start getting filed, that can be extracted and plotted across spatial plan.
But isn't our Fonterra farm plan anyway, that all fences are? And in that Fonterra plan, it also states the places where you could invest or do better work on your own property to mitigate nutrients and runoff off your own property. So
And our approach and the approach of our co-funders has always been to date that once that was required by legislation and required in a farm plan, we would provide incentives and support to undertake beyond that. Because there's things that we support, like large scale soil conservation, remediation, that at least on the initial sort of pilot farm plans, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tracy, but that have come through, it's not looking like that's going to be something that's going to be required to do by landowners, is to revegetate 20 hectares of hill country, that kind of thing. So we have been keeping close eye on that. We continue to do that as we hit this sort of mix of regulation coming through.
There's no lights on. Are we at a place, do you think, where we can eliminate our covenant rules and have the farm plan replace that? Because if my understanding is correct, the farm plan says if my 110 hectare farm, 30 of it's not suitable for grazing. So if I put cows into those areas, I'm in breach of it. So I'm just starting to wonder whether we can have a bit of a think about that,
Yeah, so we certainly we have advocated for that, because a great way to ensure that we don't have to put landowners through that, don't have to have that expense ourselves, and we can ensure the longevity of the works as if it became a regional plan thing. But like Tracy said, farm plans don't go on the title of the property, whereas a covenant does.
I get that, but they still have to be audited from time to time. And if cattle have gone into areas where the farm plan says they can't go, I appreciate it's not quite as watertight, but given it's going to be over everyone and the number of people that are potentially likely to breach it, I suspect is going to be, it might be big at the beginning, but as time goes on, it will really tighten up. But I think it's food for.
We can make a note of that as a.
Oh, Bruce, you want another question?
No, well, no, it's not a question. I'm replying to Stu, really, because there are 2 data sets that are available nationally. There's Stats NZ form that we fill out every so often, and there's also the Landcare Research Land Users Survey. There must be some data sources for the questions that use.
The stats want to be pretty crude, because I always get in trouble for being late with it, and I end up just doing it freehand. Yeah, but I'm not aware of the Landcare one. Yeah.
You all done? I know it's not a survey question at all, but one thing I'm thinking about is the cost to catchment. And I'd actually like to see a survey that takes it out of our hands and what those communities are willing to invest into their catchment. Because Waikato's and Waipa's got the Waikato River Authority that it's always there helping out. We don't have that over our side in the Waihao, Piako, Coromandel. And I'm sure that our catchments want to do more, but in an LTP system, we get locked in of what's best for the region instead of what's best for our catchment. So I think that's a part of the discussion we need to have as well, that it takes it out of us making decisions in this room. It's what our communities want to drive in that catchment and what they're prepared to pay for. And they might say, well, we'll take $5 or $10 a landowner and put into a title holder and put into our catchment because we want to see investment on, myself and Kataroan have spoken about like 37 kilometres of the Waihao and Waitoa and Piako to try and do some restoration work. But that's a 20-year project, and those communities need to be invested into that for 20 years to be able to get some scale to it. And so I think we need buy-in from those landowners to be able to, and then it takes it out of this room. That's what you're asking for. You're asking for long-term restoration projects that us councillors it just keeps moving on if we're here or not. And I think that's really important that it's taken out of our hands and it's actually driven by what our communities want. Because then we get to something that's going to have some long-term effect. It's not a political blooming decision-making all the time. Let's get it that the communities... Oh, I've said enough.
Yeah, no, and I think, and Tracy, you might know more about this than me, is that the review of funding of flood and land is extending to the full of the funding policies is in scope. And so I think when that comes to the options and goes to the next phase, the phase 2, those conversations will be able to be had. That's the project, Blair Keenan's project. And alternative strategies for that. So, yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I would just manage expectations around that because obviously the alternatives bump into a whole raft of other policies that weren't part of it, such as the stuff you've talked about today. Yeah.
And just like, I could look at the Tangarail wetland project that was pushed by 2 landowners, Simon Upton and James Reeves, Amy Taylor. And they basically presented something which not many of the landowners knew about, got everyone on board. And as soon as their stage 1 of 5 was done, they walked away from it. And yeah, I understand from Kerry and the team that there's some money left over, but the other landowners are left high and dry. And having talked to them, because I'm in that area, I was stage 5, but before it was even completed, I'd done stage 5. When the projects are done, you've got to have complete buy-in and understanding from that group, and no one was there to take it forward, and so it's lapsed. So it's disappointing when those sort of things happen. Yeah, the commitment.
Jen, you've got a question?
Yeah, actually, thanks. Robbie, I just really want to back your point that you made there, because the willingness to pay really always comes up, and especially in this area is really important. And I think we've had a really good learning through the Wharekawa Coast project. That's why I mentioned it before. And I like how there's a partnership with the TA as well. But it's bringing that all down, like you were saying, from the regional kind of focus and regional kind of voting down to that more community level, which is where we do want to engage. And I mentioned to Paula in one of the comments that she's got, one of the models I really liked was the Hamilton City Council Business Improvement District. So it's a targeted rate just for the city centre of Hamilton, and that employs a coordinator to help revitalise the city centre. So I was always wondering, why can't that be a similar setup for, say, a catchment improvement district or so, where you can have those people supporting the community groups that are there doing it themselves. I realise we're doing some of that work, but it always is from this really regional level. And I think that the way you fund these things really influences it. That's why I also said, near 100% targeted rate. I mean, that's where you get the ownership and the pride rather than that diluting effect of saying, yeah, well, this is benefiting everybody and therefore the general rate is a component and that's how everybody else gets a say. So just really want to back that point. I think that there is a place for what we've learned out of the Wharekawa project and asking community what they're willing to pay at that smaller scale. So just keen for that to be explored.
So if we just move on, can you move on to the next question? So just for the last few minutes, if there's any other issues just from the discussions, from what I heard, a lot of those things I think have already been brought up, but if there's anything else that you want to add, I'll just give you a few minutes to add to just write something else and add it onto the board. And then after that, what we're going to do is we're keen to kind of get a sense of what are the really key things for you. And so I've got 5 dots for you to vote on the things that you think are the most important on the sheets up there. Okay. So just firstly,
The dot thing's not a good thing.
oh,
Anyway, we'll try it out.
okay, you don't have to do that.
No, it's fine. We'll try it
But
out.
you've just got so many ideas, and there's actually very little overlap when I looked at it. It'd just be good to get a kind of a sense of what are the things that we most need to be focusing on. So just a few minutes if you want to add anything
Stu's
else.
got one question.
Those historical maintenance agreements, what percentage roughly are they of our overall catchment expenditure? And are we doing the bare minimum we can get away with given our legal obligations?
Yeah, I suppose I should say something during the workshop. So Lake Taupo, the Lake Taupo catchment scheme, the rate is 50%, and it's written into the land improvement agreements as an obligation on the council. Upper Waikato is 35% in the schemes there. Rest of the region, it is not. We don't have a binding commitment to pay anything. Landowner has a binding commitment to do maintenance. Whether we fund it or not is actually open to whether we have money available to fund it or not.
So am I right that with the Taupo and Upper Waikato one, that roughly whatever it is, 75% targeted, 35 general or whatever that mix is used to fund that 50% maintenance obligation contribution?
No, those two things aren't connected. So the split around 75% landowner input, 35% council input relates to building new stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that just
No,
relates to.
so where I'm trying to go is our maintenance, 50% maintenance obligations in Taupo and Upper, how do we fund those?
Oh, that's funded through Project Watershed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so my point is that all targeted from those specific areas where the agreements? Or is
No.
there a bit of a general rate going in there?
Oh, totally.
Yeah,
There'll
so-
be a funding formula, and there'll be some general rate,
Yeah.
there'll be some Waikato
So,
catchment.
so
Yeah.
I think it's high time those maintenance obligations became fully targeted to the areas where they are. But because I don't think it's appropriate for the general ratepayer to still be funding maintenance. I acknowledge we've got agreements, we've got to honour those, but I think there's a big question mark as to whether we should be putting general rate contribution into those. And so I'm flagging that for the funding review, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because Lake Taupo is an international and nationally iconic lake. So you
Yeah,
say,
yeah, but we're talking about landowners' obligations to farm in a sustainable way these days. You know, I think we're past that point now. You know, just in the same way that the contribution to the fund for the Lake Taupo cleanup, that came to an end. Yeah. You know, I just want to flag that, yeah.
That's a good point.
Because, yeah. What else was there? Oh, and the other one, brief and not necessarily completely related, but I think I've said it before. We've got plenty of historical examples of willows and things getting way out of control when we should have got in there years ago, or someone should have. Are we maintaining some sort of diary so that when we plant Matsedanas on my farm today, a flag comes up in 10 years' time? Either we do it or we, okay, Stu, you need to do that maintenance. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish we had a database going back to the
I know.
90s. But yeah, we are now, absolutely. They're all captured in our asset management system. We know what was planted, where it was planted, and they can be programmed in for maintenance or whatever it might need.
Because
Yeah, and we're
but
dragging them
what
out
I
of the
don't
river.
want us is having to go back in 10 or 20 years' time and use ratepayer funds to fix up what the landowner should have done. Because he's already had his ratepayer contribution to establish the restoration. I don't think it's appropriate for us to go back in a decade or two later and doing it again because he hasn't done his maintenance properly.
Sold the farm. No, but what I'm meaning, in that 20 years, there's been landowner change and everything, and no one knows the obligation of what was left from the previous owner.
All right, so should we give the voting a go with the dots? Okay, so I'll come around and give you 5 each. You can vote for something up to 3 dots if you feel really strongly about it, but not all 5. But you've got 5 dots, so look at all of the different themes and just the 5 things that you think are the most key for you.
Rest assured, we will be looking at everything though, but just, yeah, to get a steer on what you think is particularly critical will be really useful.
Depends on the rules, eh?
Yeah, no, you've just got one more thing to talk about. There's no left. Noel's gone. Right, we gather up again, and so we got one last question. Next steps.
Need a bell.
Oh, sorry. Yep, so just to, yeah, just to round off, just through the chair, thank you so much for your input today. We really appreciate it, how engaged and all the good ideas will enable us to early on, before we start any of the writing, incorporate that feedback. Just in terms of the next steps, we continue with our surveys. We've got a catchment group survey coming up soon. Our iwi survey is out at the moment. And we've got all those workshops internally for developing recommendations that will be coming at the later part of the project, but also interviews with other regional councils, like regional councils, and with our stakeholders, key regional stakeholders as well, and other funders. We'll be utilising the latest modelling work to help inform priorities that come through the framework, but we'll also provide you an update at the ICMC meeting in September on how the project's going, and then future meetings that we're planning to have a draft done by March, I think it is. And so I guess the next meeting after that, we'll take it to ICMC as well for consideration. But yeah, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all. It's been good discussion, robust. And I hope you have come out with some direction and help with where you're going to go with the next steps. So thank you. You got anything to say, Greg? Yeah, mic's on. Yeah, oh, yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I'll reiterate Kerry's reflections. It was a really interesting discussion. I think the single thing that I'm thinking of out of that is certainly around alignment. It's around integration, because catchment is such a complex space. There are so many people involved, and ultimately we need to understand what our place in that wider world is, and make sure that we continue to play that role now and going into the future as well, because it is a changing space. So yeah, thanks everyone for preparing for today. It was a really good, really helpful workshop. I'll close with our karakia. Unahia mai te ara tapu nui, ki wātea, ki mama, te nākau, te tinana, te hininaro, e te ara takatū, koe rā e rongo, e whakāria ake ki runga, ki a tīna. Haume huie, tae kia.